In the vast deserts and thick jungles of Central America, where the land throbbed with the pulse of thousands, the Aztec people honed their warriors into instruments of unspeakable violence. But their bloodiest wars were not fought for territory, nor for the spoils of conquest. They were fought for something far darker, more chilling, and ultimately more tragic. What if the real purpose of these wars wasn't to conquer, but to die? Not in battle, but in ritual sacrifice, an offering to the gods that demanded not only the lives of the vanquished, but of the victors themselves. The truth behind the Aztec Flower Wars is not one of heroic glory or tactical brilliance. It's the story of an empire that worshipped death, where warriors fought not to survive, but to be chosen for a fate far worse than the battlefield. To be offered to the gods on a stone altar, their hearts torn from their chests. Before we dive into this grim chapter of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss our deep dives into the darkest corners of the past. Stay with me. This is a journey you won't forget. In this video, we'll explore the brutal truth behind the Aztec Flower Wars. The battles, often fought between neighboring city-states, were not just territorial struggles. They were ritualistic conflicts designed to capture prisoners for the sacrificial altars of the gods. The narrative will take us into the minds of Aztec warriors, their training, their devotion, and the haunting knowledge that their victory in battle might lead to their own end. The sun hung low over the valley, casting an eerie red hue across the jagged hills of the Mexican plateau. The air was thick with sweat, blood, and smoke as the armies of the Chexcalans and the Mexicalans, two fierce rivals, met in an ancient ritual that masqueraded as warfare. To the untrained eye, it would have seemed like a battle for land, for honor, for domination. But beneath the surface, this was something much darker. A war for death. The Aztec warriors, known as the Eagle Knights and Jaguar Knights, were formidable and terrifying in their own right, honed to perfection by years of brutal training. They fought not only for their gods, but for a destiny carved in the sharp stone of their culture, one that would see them, if chosen, die in the most sacred and terrifying way imaginable: sacrifice. The Flower Wars, as they were called, were not fought with the goal of conquest, nor even revenge, but with one singular purpose: to capture prisoners. It was these prisoners who would be destined to stand before the mighty Templo Mayor in the heart of Tenochtitlan, their hearts torn out as an offering to Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. These were no ordinary wars. This was a fight for survival, except survival was never truly the goal. The drums echoed through the fields as the warriors clashed. Steel-edged obsidian blades gleamed in the dimming light, and the screams of the fallen filled the air. But what set these wars apart from all others was the overwhelming sense of futility that accompanied them. Aztec warriors trained in the art of sacrifice knew full well that victory meant capture, and capture meant the altar. The warriors fought with ferocity, but their bloodlust wasn't for spoils or glory, it was for honor. To be chosen as a prisoner for the gods was a position of immense importance. It wasn't a fate of shame, but one of reverence. They believed that to be selected for sacrifice was to transcend the mortal world, to ascend into the heavens, where they would serve the gods for eternity. This belief was so ingrained in their souls that it consumed their every action. It was here, on the battlefield, amid the blood and chaos, that the line between life and death blurred. A warrior who survived the battle might be killed in the aftermath, yet one who was captured could be honored with the ultimate fate: sacrificial death. The fear of death was not what haunted these men, but the possibility of being forgotten. For the Aztecs, it was better to die in the service of the gods than to live an ignoble life. Yet, despite the warriors' devotion to their gods, there was something grotesque in the way these flower wars unfolded. The truth is that the sacrifice was not solely about appeasing the gods. It was about keeping a society alive by feeding its religious hunger. With every life taken, with every heart ripped from the chest of a prisoner, the Aztec Empire hoped to ensure its own survival against the dark forces of the universe. As the battle raged on, blood mingled with the dust, the stench of death lingering in the air. The warriors, now numb to the violence, fought with a calm ferocity, as if the sound of the battle was merely background noise to their inevitable destiny. They knew the stakes. This was not a war for victory, but for a different kind of fate. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the battle reached its climax. The warriors from Tlaxcala had been driven back, their ranks thinned, but the Mexicans had paid a heavy price. Both sides had lost men, but it was the victory of the Mexicans that mattered most. The bloodied captives would be tied to the sacrificial stone, their eyes wide in terror, knowing they would never see the light of another dawn. These wars, these battles that seemed to be about power, were not truly about that at all. Power, glory, and dominance meant nothing to the Aztec worldview when compared to the divine weight of the gods' demands. This, ultimately, was a war against death itself, a war fought to appease the very forces that controlled their fate. For the Aztecs, the true cost of victory was not in spoils, but in the blood that would flow, ensuring the gods' hunger was always satisfied. To understand the true purpose behind the Flower Wars, we must step beyond the battlefield and into the heart of Aztec society. There, amidst the opulent palaces and towering pyramids, a belief system existed that governed everything, from politics to daily life. The Aztecs were not simply warriors, traders, and artisans. They were a civilization that viewed death not as an end, but as a sacred, essential force. They were defined by the gods they worshipped, and those gods demanded blood. The Flower Wars were the ritualized manifestation of this divine hunger, an offering to ensure the world did not collapse into darkness. In the temples of Tenochtitlan, priests in ceremonial robes chanted hymns and burned incense, their voices rising in unison toward the heavens. They believed that the gods had sacrificed themselves to create the world, and now it was humanity's turn to repay that debt. Without sacrifice, they believed the sun would not rise, the crops would not grow, and the very foundation of existence would crumble into oblivion. Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, demanded blood as the price of the world's survival. But it wasn't just the gods who fed off this blood. The rulers themselves, the nobles, and even the common people understood the weight of this cosmic transaction. It was a system, a cycle, woven into the fabric of life itself. At the top of this brutal hierarchy sat the Tlaloc, the emperor. Moctezuma II, perhaps the most infamous of them all, ruled over a sprawling empire that stretched across modern-day Mexico. His position was not just of political power, but of divine mandate. He was the intermediary between the gods and the people, and he too understood that the prosperity of his empire depended on the constant flow of blood. Moctezuma's reign was marked by an insatiable thirst for war. Under his rule, the Mexico warriors went beyond mere defense or territorial expansion. They waged war with a single purpose: to acquire prisoners for sacrifice. It was not unusual for entire campaigns to be launched simply to capture enemies to offer up to the gods. These captives were seen as the most valuable prize of all, and their sacrifice ensured the favor of the gods, which in turn ensured the prosperity of the empire. But there was a twisted beauty in this cycle of life and death. The Flower Wars were not just about violence. They were about purpose. Warriors fought not only for their city, but for the promise of spiritual transcendence. To be captured by the enemy, to be chosen for sacrifice, was not shameful. It was a mark of divine favor. The warriors who were sacrificed were hailed as heroes. Their deaths were the ultimate form of worship, a form of ascension to the gods. But for all the reverence paid to these sacrificial victims, the brutality of the act itself was impossible to ignore. It was not enough to kill. The hearts had to be torn from their chests while they were still beating, a ritual that both terrified and enthralled. This was the true nature of the Flower Wars. They were not merely battles for territorial gain, but rituals performed on a grand scale, a means of feeding the gods and ensuring the survival of the empire. But there was a far darker side to these wars, one that would ultimately have disastrous consequences for the Aztec civilization. The bloodshed, the brutality, it became an addiction. The more the Mexica warriors won, the more prisoners they acquired, the more blood they spilled. The gods demanded ever more sacrifices, and the people, driven by fear and faith, complied. The empire, in its thirst for conquest, did not realize that it was building a house of cards, an empire that was growing fat on the blood of its people and enemies, but one that would eventually collapse under its own weight. And yet, despite the violence, the devastation, and the endless cycle of death, the Aztecs did not see themselves as monsters. To them, this was simply the way of the world, an essential force of nature that could not be denied. The flower-like beauty of life could only bloom through the destruction of death. The terrifying paradox was that the people who lived in constant fear of their own mortality also held the power to grant themselves immortality through sacrifice. It was a culture built on a delicate balance between life and death, where one could not exist without the other. But as the empire grew, so too did the numbers of prisoners. The Flower Wars expanded and the bloodshed intensified. The Aztecs' belief in their divine purpose became a self-fulfilling prophecy. With each victory, the gods' hunger grew insatiable. Soon, the empire became a machine of death, each conquest feeding the cycle of sacrifice, which in turn kept the gods satisfied, but it also kept the empire on the brink of collapse. And then, something shifted. As the drums of war echoed across the land, a new force emerged, one that the Aztecs had never fully anticipated. The arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in 1519 marked the beginning of the end for the Aztec Empire. The gods they had served so faithfully, the gods they had shed so much blood for, would not save them now. The warriors who had fought for centuries to capture prisoners for sacrifice would find themselves victims of an even greater force, an empire built not on gods, but on steel and gunpowder. As the years passed and the last echoes of the Flower Wars faded into the history books, the Aztec Empire crumbled, not beneath the weight of external conquest, but under the immense strain of its own rituals of blood. The warriors who had once fought for glory, for gods, for the promise of immortality, now stood on the precipice of annihilation, their sacrifices no longer enough to satiate the insatiable gods they had worshipped. The true horror of the Flower Wars lies not in the violence of the battlefield, but in the way an entire civilization built itself upon the myth of eternal sacrifice, a myth that ultimately led to its undoing. The Aztecs believed they were preserving life through death, but in the end, it was their unyielding devotion to this brutal, tragic cycle that paved the way for their destruction. The gods they had served with such ferocity, the gods who had been fed by the hearts of thousands, could not prevent the collapse of the empire, nor could it shield it from the ruthless forces of fate. The Aztec world, built on sacrifice, fell into the hands of conquerors, leaving only memories of a culture whose devotion to death could not save them from the march of history. The Flower Wars were not merely battles. They were a reflection of the human obsession with mortality, a desperate attempt to bargain with death itself. And in the end, it was this very obsession, this reverence for death, that sealed the Aztecs' fate. Thank you for watching. If this deep dive into one of history's most brutal and misunderstood conflicts fascinated you, please like, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay updated on our future videos. Until next time, remember, every civilization, no matter how mighty, must one day face the price of its choices.